You're listening to a 3CR podcast recorded in the 3CR Community Radio studio in Melbourne, Australia. If you like what you hear, please consider donating or subscribing so we can keep bringing you more independent community content. For more information, go to 3cr.org.au.
Slavery is back.
Welcome to a place where private business profit from a captive labour force, yet pennies are spent on medical services to a population in which the Indigenous, the poor and the mentally ill are overrepresented. Where isolation, humiliation and degradation are facts of life. Welcome to prison.
It depends who's telling the story, I suppose. The prisoners would have one view, the people who work in the prison system would have another, and I think it's up to people to decide where the truth is.
Give government propaganda and the media spin doctors the flick. And check out Doin Time for news, views and tunes on prison issues from Guantanamo Bay to Christmas Island to prisons and detention centres everywhere. Every Monday at 4 p.m. on your community radio 3CR.
We are still fired up and we're still talking about revolution.
Hello and welcome to the Doin Time show. This is 3CR Community Radio, 855 AM on the dial, streaming live on www.3cr.org.au. This is Marisa and I'll be with you for the next hour. And a warning that this episode of Doin Time contains audio images of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have died and discussion of deaths in custody. First up on the show, we will be joined by Samantha Lee, supervising solicitor at Redfern Community Legal Centre, and we will be discussing the Police Accountability Dashboard, a groundbreaking tool and the first of its kind in Australia. The dashboard allows the public to access insightful, comprehensive data about the use of New South Wales police powers. We will also bring you an interview with David Mejia-Canales, a senior human rights lawyer at the Human Rights Law Centre. We will interview him about the New South Wales Parliament needing to lower voting age to 16 and remove barriers to improve democracy. Right now, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and people with disability and people in prisons and young people face additional barriers to voting in New South Wales. So we will speak to him later on. And we're also hoping to speak to Ian Rintoul from the Refugee Action Coallition about the ongoing violation of human rights in terms of permanent visa protections, which are not forthcoming to asylum seekers and refugees who are in encampments in both New South Wales and Victoria and Brisbane. So let's see who's going to go first. We'll be now going through to some announcements.
Latin American Solidarity Network, LASNET, together with other organisations, are hosting the Solidarity Gathering Conference, Tejiendo Rebeldías, to build bridges of struggle between Indigenous and grassroots communities. The gathering will be held on the 17th to the 20th of October at the Institute of Post-Colonial Studies in North Melbourne. There will be plenary sessions, workshops, documentaries, photo exhibitions and information stalls, with discussion topics including resistance of Indigenous peoples, sovereignty and self-determination, militarisation, colonialism, advances of extractivism, and our visions of emancipatory futures. For more information, please visit LASNET's Facebook page or call 0425 539 149. Latin American Solidarity Network is a 3CR supporter.
And in case you've just tuned in, this is the Doin Time show, and we're about to bring you an interview with Samantha Lee, who is supervising solicitor of the Redfern Community Legal Centre. Hello, Sam. Welcome to the program.
Oh, hello. Good to be back again.
Great to have you. Yeah, like we've had a few discussions, haven't we, about police accountability, haven't we, over the years?
We have, yes. It's a big topic area.
Indeed, and I believe that the Redfern Community Legal Centre has launched a police accountability dashboard, which is hopefully going to be encouraging some transparency. Can you talk about specifics and just tell us what's happening?
Yeah, sure. So we have been collecting a lot of data from New South Wales Police via Freedom of Information Law. And what we wanted to do is present that data to the public in a way that really does tell a story. So we engaged with this charity organisation called Data for Good, and they match us up with a data analyst and help us develop a dashboard. So we launched what's called the Police Accountability Dashboard. It has data from 2017 to 2023, all data obtained from New South Wales Police. The data focuses on strip searches, use of force and move-on directions at the moment, but we will expand that data to other areas. It really does tell a story about the use of powers, police powers, so it's great to have it out there.
So how would that work in practice? How would that actually help marginalised people and communities to benefit from this?
Well, that was the purpose, yes. I mean, I think transparency does equal accountability, and New South Wales Police are a government body, and it's really important to know where their resources are being dedicated. And what you can clearly see through the dashboard is a disproportionate use of powers against First Nations people. It really is set out very clearly in the dashboard. For example, use of force, 45% of use of force incidences were used against First Nations people. In terms of strip searches, around 30% of strip searches, First Nations people were the subjects of those searches. And then on move-on directions, it clearly shows in a graph that also over 40% of move-on directions are given to First Nations people. So it really does tell a compelling story about disproportionality of use of force against First Nations people.
Absolutely. And
powers.
Exactly. So you were just talking about powers just now, Sam. So does that mean then that the police will allow this to be a resource? How does it... Because I know in Victoria, for example, there were some really major cases that the African community put against police and that there were no statistics then.
Yes,
So it appears. I mean, I was reading the media release earlier on, and I think there were a couple of quotes from you about the freedom of information laws.
Yes.
So how does that differ? I mean, how can this resource enable police to allow it?
Yeah, so it's a good question. Freedom of information laws are different in every state and territory, unfortunately, and Victoria has very nasty freedom of information laws, which really don't allow access to data, which is a real problem, and I think is doesn't allow justice to be done really by not seeing the figures.
Yeah.
But New South Wales has quite a different legal landscape when it comes to access to information. I must say it's pretty good in New South Wales, and once you've obtained the data legally through freedom of information laws, police can't prevent you from publishing that data. I mean, there's no personal information attached to the data. It is just figures, so there's no breach of privacy. It's a valid legal police accountability dashboard.
So it really does offer extensive data obtained from New South Wales Police, not only through freedom of information laws, but also it analyses the use of police powers, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does, and it's. It's so important to have those figures out there. I mean, I'm looking at a figure in terms of strip searches. It shows me that over 60,000 strip searches occurred in New South Wales alone between that date period, 2017 to 2023. It's an extraordinary amount of strip searches, and it blatantly does tell me as a lawyer that strip searches have been unlawfully used, because otherwise we'd probably see about 60 in there, because they're powers that are only meant to be used in very exceptional circumstances. So to have such big figures in the dashboard really does tell a very disturbing story.
It really does, and I mean it's lovely to have you back, actually, Sam, because you're always a wealth of information, and you tell us quite explicitly what's going on there. And I think that I'm wondering if you could comment, maybe give an example. Like, for example, if you've got someone who's been strip searched, say, at a music venue, or, you know, an Aboriginal person who gets stopped and strip searched. So that information then would go to the police, and the police would have to report on that, right?
Yes, they're meant to. Whenever they conduct a strip search, police are meant to enter data in what's called the police data system. It's called COPS, actually. And there are drop-down fields within their data system. It could say strip search, it could just say general search or frisk search. And it's also meant to say the reasons for the search, for example, suspicion of drugs. So all this information is meant to be plugged into the database system. However, police watchdogs have found that police have pretty poor consistency around input of data, and often sometimes don't import data, sometimes don't categorise it properly. So the data itself is only as good as the person inputting it, and that is, you know, a bit of a problem when it comes to police data.
But, as you said, the freedom of information laws are much better in New South Wales, and what that means then is that you can actually get that data through that, can't you?
Yeah, that's right. It's a really, I think, you know, New South Wales should be commended for the having this legislation in place. Obviously, there are some, you know, if you put in for some information, there is sections under the Act that can be applied to deny you access to that information. But generally, you can get access, and if not, there is an appeal mechanism. You can go to the tribunal, or you can have an internal review. So in that sense, you know, it's a more transparent and fair system than what's in place in other jurisdictions in Australia.
Well, let's hope that, you know, that these things can improve, because it seems to me in all the interviews that I have conducted on the Doin Time show that there is a lot of disproportionate police powers being given, you know, to First Nations people and indeed asylum seekers and refugees as well.
Yeah, that's right. And the data also shows that police powers are used against First Nations people from a younger age. So they're exposed to policing much younger than non-First Nations people. And, you know, it just sets everyone up for failure, really.
I wonder why that would be. I wonder if there could be some racialised behaviour going on.
Oh, look, I have no doubt there's some racialised behaviour going on in police, like there is everywhere. Police are not, you know, they are certainly on the ground, and they represent different parts of the community, and that all comes out within the police force itself. Not to say there isn't police out there that are trying to get rid of some really bad culture, but I think from the figures you can certainly see there's some racial elements to policing.
I really welcome an opportunity for the police to use this police accountability dashboard. Yes,
thanks. Yeah, me too. I think, you know, it is like it's their information, it's clear, it provides very colourful graphics that are easy to understand, and really they just need to look at to see how they need to close some very horrible gaps in the use of force.
And very useful for the legal centres too, isn't it?
It is. It's useful for legal centres, policymakers, lawmakers, the general public, you know, academics, anyone that wants to find out about police powers. This is the place to go.
And when was it launched?
It was just launched last week, yes. We were, working hard through a whole year to try and get this up and running, and I'm so pleased to get it out there.
Fantastic. And if people, lawyers and policymakers, if they need to get access, how can they do that?
Yeah, they just need to go to rlc.org.au and go to the homepage or news and events, and they can get access to the dashboard that way.
And just a final question, just to put this all in perspective, Sam. So I'm just trying to imagine this. So you've got the dashboard there, and say a lawyer went there and looked at that dashboard. What sort of questions would there be there?
Yeah, so if they were just looking at the dashboard, they can look at the breakdown of strip searches, use of force and move on directions by First Nations and non-First Nations. They can also look at breakdown by gender, also by age for First Nations and non-First Nations. They can look at strip searches in custody and in the field. They can also look at strip searches by location. So from their area, they can see how many strip searches occur in the suburbs, and also with the similar stuff except for location-based for move. Oh, sorry, no, there is location for move on directories as well. So yes, it's a range of different data sets for different topic areas.
Sam, thank you so much for coming onto the program, and it's always good to have a look at a piece of good news and a good tool, isn't it?
It is. It's good to have it out there. Thank you so much for your interest.
Thanks a lot.
Okay,
thanks.
Bye.
Take care. Bye. And that was Samantha Lee from Redfern Community Legal Centre looking at a really valuable resource, and I certainly give a second call out to welcoming the opportunity for police to participate in this. And it's a groundbreaking tool and the first of its kind in Australia that will allow the public to access insightful, comprehensive data about the use of New South Wales police powers. That was a very interesting interview.
Keffiyehs are Palestinian scarves, and they're a symbol of support for justice for the Palestinian people. From the traditional black and white keffiyeh to an array of modern designs, explore the range and order online or drop by 3CR during business hours. Wear your support for the rights of Palestinians. Go to keffiyehs.org.au, that's KUFIYAS.org.au. A 3CR supporter.
Stand in solidarity with Palestine this Sunday.
Hi, it's Nasser Mashni from Palestine Remembered, Australia's only dedicated show on Palestine. Join me every Saturday morning at 9:30 and very importantly, get along to our rallies. Sunday, 12 o'clock, State Library. Join us.
We have to mobilise to show our support for Palestine. 12 p.m, State Library, this Sunday.
Rally to demand freedom and justice for Palestine. No war on Gaza.
Free Palestine Melbourne is a 3CR supporter.
And in case you've just tuned in, this is the Doin Time show, 3CR Community Radio. And we're going to be speaking next up with Ian Rintoul, who is from the Refugee Action Coallition. Just wanted to check in with him about what's going on in terms of the ongoing violations of human rights in regards to permanent visas or the lack of permanent visas and all the encampments that are going on with refugee and asylum seekers. Hello, Ian. Welcome to the program.
Yeah, hi, Marisa.
Hi.
Thanks.
Now, Ian, lovely to have you on. I mean, I've interviewed quite a few people in terms of this campaign, including Renuga from the Tamil Council and a couple of other, refugees.
Yep.
But it's great to have you back. Just wondering if you could just give us a little bit of insight and background into what's going on?
Well, I suppose we've come to this point after many, many years of campaigning on behalf of the people who are the victims of fast track. I mean, we've condemned fast track when it was introduced in 2014, by the Morrison government. The problems associated with fast track were clear then, and they've just become compounded, over the years, to the point where the Labor Party had policy against fast track, rejecting fast track, of throwing it out when it became having policy against it when it became government. So when Labor, won government 2 years ago, I think it was one of the things, along with temporary protection visas being turned into permanent visas, that there was a very, very high expectation that Labor would act quickly to junk fast track and to put a process in place to review the people who were the victims of fast track. And I think it's impossible to get across, I think, just the misery that's been created by fast track. You've got many people now who are on no visas at all, so they've got no income, they've got no certainty, no right to work, no right to Medicare. And even those people who have got the right to work are on 6-month visas. They're temporary visas. They mean it's difficult to get job. It's difficult to get accommodation. They still got no. They got very minor. They get 2/3 of the dole if they're not working. And of course no right to travel. The numbers of them are people who have lost family. Over during COVID. They were unable to travel to, say the last goodbyes, or, possible to get to funerals, separated parents. Anyway, I could go on and on, but that's the kind of misery that the government has created. There is a genuine, underclass in Australia. Many of those people who did have the right to work, they worked through COVID, they were in hospitality and retail, they were couriers, they were in aged care. But absolutely no recognition whatsoever of the misery that fast track has created, and no permanent pathway yet. And so we tried protests. There have been big protests in Canberra. There have been 2 major walks from Melbourne to Canberra, from Sydney to Canberra, by women in both cases who were affected by fast track. And there has just been nothing. There's been nothing. And then this year, it started in Melbourne. The protest, the 24/7 started in Melbourne, and it spread from there. So now got Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Perth. Now got 24/7 outside Sam Lim's office in Perth. So people, I think, have felt getting close to the next election, and it's really just the last throw of the dice, really the last push on Labor to actually put something in place so that people can get permanent visas.
Absolutely, and in fact, I did interview recently Najez from Melbourne, an Iranian woman who was at the Docklands there, and it's just really difficult to get blankets and other resources, and they're really cold at night. It's horrific, and I suppose Sydney was a bit hot recently, wasn't it? But
being cold and hot and rainy, it is everywhere.
It's
I think
terrible,
on the
Ian.
street.
It's terrible, the conditions. These refugees have these encampments, they're camping out, and what's happening? Nothing.
No, that's right. Nothing, definitely. I mean, I think people feel like they have pushed the door open a little bit. I mean, interestingly enough, on 2 occasions, Tony Burke has actually come out of his office. We haven't got any formal email reply ever from Tony Burke's office. We've met with their officers in the manager and the office staff twice now, out at Punchbowl. But on 2 occasions, Tony Burke's actually come out of his office to speak to the refugees who are on the footpath outside
in New South Wales.
Protesting. In New South Wales, yeah. But we've not got what we asked for. We've been asking for a meeting where we actually discuss the solution, like what the government is putting in place. We've put forward some suggestions about what kind of process could be put in place to guarantee that people would have a pathway to permanency. That's the meeting that we want. And I think the protests, the 24/7 protests, are going to keep happening until we get that meeting, until we actually get an undertaking that there is a pathway for permanency for the, it's around 10,000 people, all in slightly different stages. And the Labor Party, Tony Burke and others, sometimes use that to say it's complicated. Actually, it's not complicated. You probably heard already from other people you've interviewed, but they were able to give the Billa family a permanent visa with just a signature from the Home Affairs Minister. That's all it takes. And if they can do it for the Billa family, the Billa family themselves have said they're very grateful for what the government has done and can't see any reason why the government can't do for everyone else who is in exactly the same situation as they were.
Indeed. I mean, they think that was, I think, a bit of an election promise, wasn't it, with Labor? But it really does beggars belief, really, because there are so many refugees, particularly, around 10,000 who were denied protection visas under the misnamed fast-track system introduced in 2014 by the Morrison Liberal government, and now it's continuing with Labor.
Yeah. Look, and people are bewildered. Like I sat in the office, with about 12, 14 of them, talking to the manager and the office staff in Tony Burke's office, and there are people there, who are members of the Labor Party, people who had worked for the Labor Party actually to get them elected because they believed that Labor was going to do something about the fast track system. There are many of the Bangladeshis in Tony Burke's own electorate, have worked tirelessly for the Labor Party almost since they arrived in Australia and got bridging visas, able to live in the community. It is really astonishing, that Labor, owes these people in many ways. It owes them anyway because of the fact that they've been failed by the fast track system. Labor's recognised that failure, but hasn't put anything in place to rectify it. But they've also got. There would be hundreds of them who have actually worked for the Labor Party to get Labor elected, and now feel like they've shut the door, they turned their back. Now we're hopeful. Tony Burke there was a small glimmer of hope at one point where he said that he had begun discussions with his own department, about solutions. But that's now several weeks ago, and we've had no update. We've tried to get another meeting, with the office. We've appealed to Tony Burke himself to provide some kind of update, so there's some indication that those talks and those discussions are progressing, not just that there's some consideration, but we need them to be progressed. I mean, what we need more than anything else is just a clear undertaking from Labor that they will find a way to create those permanent pathways, and that's a political commitment. We can discuss the process that's necessary to do that, but if we had a clear undertaking from Labor that they were going to rectify the situation, that they were committed, to finding a permanent pathway, that would be an enormous step forward. At the moment, people are very committed to keeping the 24/7 protests happening, and quite in spite of all the difficulties over the last few weeks, we've had problems with police in Queensland. We've had problems with the council in New South Wales. I know there's been consistent problems and harassment. In Melbourne, you've had harassment from the council, down there as well. I mean, we don't need that, harassment. We don't need that difficulty with the authorities. Again, if there was a clear indication from Labor commitment to providing that permanent pathway, then that would be just great.
Absolutely, and Ian, thank you so much for coming onto the program. So basically, there's still the encampment in Melbourne at Docklands, isn't there? And also in Sydney. And whereabouts in Sydney?
At that Punch Bowl, right outside Tony Burke's office, just near the Punch Bowl station. One the Broadway, it's called. It's a shopping centre. His office backs onto the footpath, and sometimes there've been 300. One day there was actually 700 people actually gathered outside his office. So yes, Docklands, Punch Bowl in Queensland, outside Annika Wells' office at the moment. Been a couple of protests at Jim Chalmers in Perth. We're at Sam Lim's office. So the message is being shafted home. Julian Hill, people also at Julian Hill's office in Melbourne.
Perfect.
So. hopefully they're getting the message.
Well, I hope so. Let's continue. Ian, thank you so much for coming onto the program.
Yeah, thanks very much, Marisa.
Take care. Thanks.
Yeah, bye for now.
Bye-bye. And that was Ian Rintoul from the Refugee Action Coalition speaking about the fast-track system and some of the draconian measures, and in particular asylum seekers and refugees are on this system are denied higher education and trade qualifications, and many are also the heroes of the pandemic, working in warehouses, couriers and aged care, but who are now an underclass subsisting on serial 6-month visas, vulnerable to exploitation with no future certainty at all.
Are you ready for a challenge of prehistoric proportions? The Lost in Science team are holding our annual trivia fundraiser. It's a night of questions and games about science and about other things too, because we understand not everyone knows their Stegosaurus from their Stegodon. The fun starts at 7 p.m. on Monday 28th of October at the Birmingham Hotel, corner of Smith and Johnson Streets, Fitzroy. Tickets are $20 and help keep community radio on the air. You can book a team of up to 6 by following the links on the 3CR website, on Facebook at Lost in Science on 3CR, or emailing us at lostinSci@gmail.com. Get in now before this opportunity goes extinct.
And you're back with the Doin Time show, and it's approximately 4:32, and we're going to be speaking presently with David Mejia-Canales, who is a senior human rights lawyer at the Human Rights Law Centre, and he focuses on defending democratic freedoms like the right to protest, the right to vote, and the right to participate in public affairs. Now, the Human Rights Law Centre appeared before a parliamentary inquiry to call on the Minns government to make voting more accessible and lower the voting age to 16 for state elections. Right now, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, people with disability, people in prisons and young people face additional barriers to voting in New South Wales. Our third interview will concentrate on this and also the submission that has been created by the Human Rights Law Centre. Hello, David. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's lovely to have you, David. And I think I did interview once before in May, a couple of years ago, and in regards to the right to protest.
That's right. It's always topical, but glad to be talking to you about another related right, the right to vote.
Absolutely. So tell us what's been going on, David.
Yeah, of course. Now, I'll be clear that this was evidence that was given to the New South Wales Parliament, but a lot of these things are very, very easily transferable over in Victoria and indeed in great parts of the country. So we appeared before the New South Wales Parliament to recommend several things, particularly things that are really causing a real barrier to people exercising the right to vote. It's really important that we highlight, though, that because our system is a compulsory voting system, then there have to be as few, ideally no barriers to anyone exercising their vote, because not exercising a vote means you get a fine. So, particularly for anyone, Aboriginal communities, namely, who live out on homelands, voting is nowhere near as accessible to them as it is for anyone who's living in big sort of urban areas. We also think that the voting age should be lowered to 16. That's because of our understanding of child and adolescent development. Children and young people at that age are capable of making informed decisions, so that the laws should reflect that. And also electoral commissions, not just in New South Wales but everywhere, have to be better resourced to be able to provide mobile polling booths to places where people may not be able to leave easily, prisons, hospitals, hospices, these sorts of places. And finally, New South Wales has some of the toughest restrictions on anyone who's serving a custodial sentence. In New South Wales, you cannot vote if you're serving a custodial sentence of 12 months or more. And we think that should be scrapped. That's not uniform. Places like the ACT and South Australia do not have any limits on people's ability to vote. In Victoria, I believe it is 3 years, and it is 3 years at the national level. We think these restrictions, there's no good justification for most of these restrictions on people voting if they're in prison, and they should be removed.
Absolutely. And it seems to me like you were mentioning, and in fact there's a recommendation in the submission, isn't there, written by the Human Rights Law Centre, that Aboriginal people on homelands also have language barriers as well.
Oh, most definitely. You know, at least here in New South Wales, what happens is that, well, what did happen at the last state election is that the Commission only ran one workshop with elders about the upcoming election, and there were really no electoral materials that were provided that we could find for across the state that were culturally appropriate, or at least in different languages, including Aboriginal languages, and that is a real barrier to voting, not just at a general election, indeed at the referendum that we've just had, and any other future referendums that we must have. If people are going to vote, they need to be informed, and they can only be informed in a way that is meaningful to them.
It's kind of a bit weird though, isn't it, that, Aboriginal people are on their own land and they don't even have the tools to vote. It really highlights, doesn't it, ongoing colonisation and the government's complicit in genocide.
Oh, look, this is actually there is a direct link between these sorts of voting barriers and colonisation. And it's not a long link, it's a very, very short one. I mean, Aboriginal people were finally granted the right to vote in Queensland in the 60s. This is actually just recent knowledge. And in fact, Aboriginal people were deliberately excluded. It was an absolute deliberate choice to be excluded from voting across most jurisdictions until very recently. This is not an accident. This was a choice, and colonisation made this happen.
Absolutely. So let's look at the submission. Tell us a little bit about the recommendations of the submission.
Sure. I think we'll start with one that I think is really, really important, and that is allowing people in prisons to vote. We recommend that there should be the restrictions that exist at the moment, where it's at a blanket ban in New South Wales, is 12 months on anyone who's serving a 12-month custodial sentence or more. I mean, that is one, just unfair, because it's a blanket ban. There is no consideration for someone's individual circumstances. It's also quite a very, very, very low bar. So someone who might have committed some absolutely heinous crime might be able to be barred from voting the same way that someone who might have been arrested at a protest, for example. So there's no differentiation there. It's also deeply unfair because of colonisation. The rates of imprisonment of First Nations people is a lot higher. So this disproportionately impacts them. So we believe that these restrictions around the country should be removed. International law does allow for the restriction of the right to vote, but only for very serious offences after taking consideration, the facts of each case. That's not what's happening anywhere in the country, and we think that needs to change. But also the commissions everywhere have to be resourced to do a lot more outreach, not just to people in closed facilities, as I mentioned before, like prisons and hospitals, but also for anyone who might be sleeping rough or anyone who might not have a fixed address. These people are absolutely able, they must be resourced to vote, and we should be moving heaven and earth, not just to make sure that they have stable accommodation, but that they can continue to feed into the democracy that they are definitely a part of, as well as the things that we mentioned before about making sure that electoral information is accessible and that it is culturally appropriate, and that it is in Aboriginal languages. One final thing I want to mention is that at least here in New South Wales, the New South Wales Electoral Commission deems a polling booth to be accessible if it is physically accessible only, which is really important, of course, but it doesn't actually take into account the full spectrum of disabilities that might be a barrier to voting. And we think these things need to be urgently implemented. We can't take a narrow definition of accessibility for voting purposes. It's just not on. It is absolutely meaning that people are not able to have their say as they're entitled to and as they're legally required to.
And indeed, one of the things that's quite paramount as well is the fact that blind and vision impaired people in some ways are considered illiterate by the Electoral Commission. There is barely anything in Braille to help people to vote. Telephone voting is totally abysmal for people that are blind and vision impaired, because a lot of people want to be literate.
Yeah, and a lot of people want to exercise their vote without having, other people kind of looking over their shoulder, even though, when people are using technology-assisted voting, like phone voting, there is someone on the other line that they have to sort of tell their voting intentions to. Yeah. Yes, these people are sort of sworn to secrecy and all of this, but that's actually not the point. If someone is able to exercise a vote without assistance, they should be able to do that regardless of their individual circumstances.
Absolutely. And in fact, I know I have a friend who's vision impaired whose parents would say, "You're voting this," and they'd put it on the paper.
That's right. We've heard so many instances of that happening, and that is just, it is immoral, it is unlawful, it is all the things.
So the right to vote for people in prison is protected by the Australian Constitution, isn't it?
In some ways, yes. Now, we were the lawyers who acted for Auntie Vicky Roach, who is an absolute legend.
I love Vicky. She's been on the show heaps of times.
I don't doubt it. She's an absolute icon. And in fact, she was the one, her case, Roach and the Australian Electoral Commissioner, is what actually confirmed that we do have a right to vote here in this country under the Constitution, but also that anyone who's serving a prison sentence of 3 years or more, so the High Court set the bar at 3 years, then they are excluded from voting. But anyone who's serving a custodial sentence of under 3 years can still vote at Commonwealth elections and referendums. And this is because of Auntie Vicky Roach's advocacy. This case happened, if you remember way back when, the Howard government tried to make it that anyone in prison was not able to vote whatsoever.
Yeah.
And Auntie Vicky Roach led that challenge in the High Court, and it is because of her that the right to vote for people in prison has been protected and has been expanded, but there is a limit, at least at the federal level, for anyone who's serving a custodial sentence of 3 years or more.
Absolutely. So, look, it really is an excellent submission. Can you tell listeners where they can go to find it?
Oh, of course. If you go to our website, hrlc.org.au, HRLC for Human Rights Law Centre, you'll be able to see it there, but also the previous submissions that we did around the federal elections, which happened that submission was about 2 years old, but you'll be able to find them all there. And the recommendations are the same. People in prison and any other closed facilities should be able to vote. People who should be able to vote freely, that is. Same thing for people with disabilities, people living on homelands. We all have a right to vote, and we should be facilitated in exercising our right.
Also, I think with this submission is really, from the Human Rights Law Centre, is really about a proposal, isn't it? There's not much. Yeah. There's not a lot of power there, is there really?
That's right. And look, what happens is that often, parliaments around the country, after elections, you usually do have an inquiry into looking at, well, how did the previous election go and how can we make any changes in the future? Thankfully, here in New South Wales, the Parliament Committee looking into these things was very interested and engaged, particularly another point in our submission that I mentioned earlier, that we should lower the voting age to 16, and that was something that they were actively really very engaged in. But there isn't a proposal as such, so we're not responding to like a law or some sort of legal change. These are just sort of slightly administrative inquiries into the conduct of elections in each state and at the federal level.
But it is a very powerful submission, David. I mean, the submission really highlights a lot of really important information. I suppose one of the things that I have found over the years when I've interviewed elders on this show and also young First Nations people is a lot of them don't want to vote because of transgenerational trauma and ongoing colonisation. And the fact that they're brought up on the missions or they're descendants of people being brought up on the missions, and they see voting as succumbing to the white man's law.
Yeah, and that's a very, very valid argument. As I mentioned before, there is. I mean, we do have history of deliberately excluding First Nations people, not just from the franchise, but from anywhere and everything on their own land. So, I'm absolutely not surprised of these viewpoints. Of course. I mean, if you look at the history of electoral law, we do not have an enviable record of making sure that everyone can vote. But we're
Correct.
getting there, and we hope that these sorts of things are actually working towards that. But we do urge all governments to take these things seriously. They are fundamental to our democracy.
Indeed they are. And in fact, one of the things that's quite interesting here is that people with disability are left out of policy, and the voting, although it's a fundamental right, I find it interesting that the Royal Commission, Disability Royal Commission, has not really been, a lot of the recommendations haven't been recognised by government. It is kind of interconnected, isn't it?
Oh, most definitely, yes. Absolutely, yes. Not just, First Nations justice, but disability justice. The right to participate in public affairs for all of us is a right. So it is recognised under human rights law that we have the right to participate either directly by putting ourselves for election for Parliament, or indirectly through our representatives. And that means, that comes with a whole suite of issues, making sure that we have accessible information to us, whether we speak another language or whether we have a disability or whatever the case may be. All of these things must be looked at holistically, which is what we try to do a little bit in our submission. But I think that the fundamental point remains in that voting is probably one of the purest exercises of democracy that we have, and we all must do it if we're eligible. Therefore, there must be zero barriers to being able to exercise this right. And we hope that our submission is going to take us a little bit of a way towards making governments realise this. I can't believe, in many ways, I can't believe we're still having this conversation.
I know.
But we're pushing, and that's I think, just as important.
And finally, I really like recommendation 6. The committee recommends that New South Wales Government resource the New South Wales Electoral Commission to work directly with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community organisations to increase enrolment and participation by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think some of our particularly disability activists, but First Nations activists, they've also given us that language of nothing about us without us. And I think that it is really important that this filters through to the people who are making the decisions. I don't doubt that the Commission wishes to do more, but I do believe that they may not be resourced to do more. And that's really government's role. So government needs to really resource these commissions to be able to undertake this work, because when they do it, it actually works. I mean, what a surprise, right? That when we engage the people who are most impacted by these decisions, as part of the policy development, the solutions work because they've worked at the federal level, and we need them to work everywhere. But governments must prioritise them. That's the point.
Absolutely. And you actually appeared in Parliament and presented this submission, David?
Yes, I did, and I gave evidence to it as well. And I hope, and it appeared to me that the committee was engaging with it in good faith, and I certainly hope they do, because these things are not just sort of wish lists. These are not things that are just nice to have. The fact that we're having conversations about how many barriers still exist to people exercising their right, for people with disability, for young people, for First Nations people. I mean, the list does go on. We should not be having these conversations in 2024.
Absolutely. David, do you have any final comments? And also, can you just, and for case listeners have just tuned in, alert listeners to the submission and where they can find it?
Of course. So if you log on to our website, hrlc.org.au, under submissions, you'll be able to see our submissions to the New South Wales Parliament on electoral rights, but also previous submissions that we've done to the Commonwealth Parliament about electoral rights. And I think they also, the way that we've written them, is they also give a little bit of a flavour as to what the right involves and also how it must be protected. So I would encourage your listeners to tune in and have a read of the submissions, because not only are they're making demands of Parliament, but we try to write them in such a way that they're also a bit of a tool for the community and other advocates to use in their own advocacy, and also just to learn about how these rights work.
Exactly. And of course, we cannot forget people in prison as well, and people who sleep rough, that there needs to be the mobile polling booths?
Oh, without a doubt. If we ensure that anyone who is eligible and willing and wanting to have a say, if they're in prison or in a closed facility or sleeping rough, if these folks can vote in the way that folks living in big cities can, then we have gone a lot of the way to actually making voting accessible for all of us, as it's meant to be.
Thanks so much, David. I know I've kept you here a bit longer than usual, but I hope you enjoyed doing this interview with me.
Always, always. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure.
Lovely to have you. Thanks, David. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. And that was David Mejia-Canales, who is the senior human rights lawyer at the Human Rights Law Centre, speaking about the right to vote and looking at a submission that was presented to Parliament, evidence to Parliament, in regards to the right to vote and to participate in public affairs for Aboriginal people and also people with disability and people in prison. And we'll just go into an announcement.
The LGBTIQA+ Multicultural Fair Day returns this year in Marybeck. The fair focuses on human rights, showcasing LGBTIQA+ services, community engagement, networking and connections in a safe, supportive environment. Workshops include street art by Doyle from Blender Studio, circus skills by the Women's Circus, information stalls by Switchboard, Q-Law and Pride in the North, as well as DJ giveaways and yummy food. The LGBTIQA+ Multicultural Fair Day, Saturday, October the 5th, 3:30 till 7:30 p.m. at the Coburg Uniting Church Hall, 19 to 21 Victoria Street, Coburg. Entry is free and all are welcome. Marybeck City Council is a 3CR supporter.
Side by side, we'd walk along to the end of Gertrude Street, and we'd tarpaul and muster for a quart of wine. Thick or thin, right or wrong, in the cold and in the heat, we'd cross over Smith Street to the end of the line. Then we'd laugh and sing, do anything to take away the pain, trying to keep it down as it first went down in Charcoal Lane. Spinning yarns and telling jokes, now the wine is tasting good, 'cause it's getting closer and closer to its end. Have a sip and roll some smokes, we'd smoke tailor-mades if we could, but we just made do with some city street blend. Then we'd all chuck in and we'd start to grin when we had enough to do it again. But if things got tight, then we had to bite for Charcoal Lane. Up Gertrude Street, we'd walk once more with just a few cents short, and we'd stop at the builders to see who we could see. Then we'd bite around until we'd score a flagon of McWilliamsport, enough to take away our misery. And we'd all get drunk, oh so drunk, maybe a little insane. Then we'd stagger home all alone, and the next day we'd do it again. Have a reviver in Charcoal Lane. I'm a survivor of Charcoal Lane.
And it's approximately 4:55 and we're nearing the end of the Doin Time show, and I wanted to thank all our guests for coming onto the show. We really highlighted a lot of issues around New South Wales, but as one guest said, it is transferable to Victoria and the whole of Australia. So thank you to Ian and David and also Samantha for coming onto the show and making it such an informative event. And you just heard a song by Archie Roach, Charcoal Lane. It just, whenever I hear Archie Roach, I always think about Ruby and himself, how all Aboriginal people, a lot of them die a lot younger than non-Aboriginal people. And the Doin Time show is a place where First Nations people are honoured. All people are honoured, really, but First Nations people do have a lot of disproportionate things that happen with police powers. And it's a safe environment for people from all marginalised communities to chat and to talk about what concerns them. So we're going to be going out now with our theme song, Black Fella, White Fella from the Rumpy Band. Tune in every Monday from 4 to 5 for the Doin Time show. And it's goodbye from Marisa. And as I always say, kindness costs nothing. Bye.
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast. If you found it valuable, please consider donating or subscribing to support independent community radio. To find out more, go to 3cr.org.au.